The Sabbath is a Judeo-Christian once-a-week day of rest practice, formally observed by Orthodox Jews, Seventh-day Adventists, and some Methodists. But recently, there's been a rise in secular versions to combat the go-go-go of modern life. The Sunday reset, unplugged Sundays, slow down Sundays, other kinds of Sundays.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it!
For the last few years, I've made a point of regularly observing the Sabbath, setting Sunday aside for rest, reflection, scripture study, etc. But recently, I've started to get the eerie feeling that I'm just not doing it right. I've been bro-theologying and bro-sciencing my way through justifying how I spend my Sundays. So I think it's time to get rigorous and really figure out, what is a Sabbath for? And how can I best utilize it? So this video is for people who want to understand the Sabbath tradition better. But it's also for people who are not religious. Maybe you're spiritual, agnostic, Pastafarian. You know, I knew a Pastafarian in junior high. It was not ironic. It might have been ironic. No one knows anything in middle school. And you're starting to maybe consider the possibility that a lot of religious practices, while maybe they're not prescribed by some deity, they may have been an unconsciously developed and then articulated, highly efficient and effective way to serve our human needs. If that's the case, this video is for you too.
I don't believe in God. I believe in science.
We'll start off by systematically reviewing what the Bible says about the Sabbath, seeing what specific instructions we can draw out of the relevant verses, and then use evidence-based scholarly sources, both philosophical and biopsychosocial, to optimize how we follow those instructions. So since we're going to be systematic about this, first we go to the trusty internet, full of true things that are true, and we find every scriptural mention of the Sabbath. Now, I'll spare you the full quotes of all 156 mentions of the word Sabbath, but here's a list of verses if you want to peer review. Now, a lot of these verses just mention things that happened on a Sabbath without any real instruction, so we can deprioritize those and focus on the others. Now, we have a much shorter, more manageable list. Now, in nearly all of these remaining verses, the Sabbath is highlighted as a day of rest, during which no work should be done, which should be kept holy as a reminder that we are sanctified and set apart. Now, these are all things that I've heard before, and clearly they're important. But the Christianese can easily fall into semantic satiation, and it can all be vaguely written off as relax for the day and make sure you go to church. But we're looking for more than that, since we're trying to uphold covenant here. Luckily, there are a few verses that get more specific. Isaiah mentions twice that the Sabbath should be kept without profaning it, that we can honor it by calling the Sabbath a spiritual delight, not going your own way, or engaging in your own pleasure, or speaking your own idle words. So, Sabbath tip number 1, keep the Sabbath about the Sabbath. Your spiritual life is the priority, so your thoughts and actions should reflect that. Don't use Sundays to get chores and Saturday stuff done. Do your Saturday stuff on Saturday, and prep everything you need for a successful Sunday on Saturday evening, or whatever the day before your Sabbath is. Some people have to work on Sundays, so they have a Wednesday Sabbath. Up to you. And you should look forward to it. It should be both restorative and intentional. Things we'll go over in more detail later in the video. And one quick and easy thing you can do to reduce distractions on your Sabbath is to download an app or website blocker like BlockSite or Cold Turkey. These apps let you restrict your access to things like your work email, Instagram, X, Twitter, or LinkedIn, according to a set schedule determined by you. iPhone users can also make custom focus filters that limit who you get notifications from. As you can see, I have one called Sabbath that only allows family and close friends to contact me while it's on. Works pretty well. Similar to keeping the Sabbath about the Sabbath, when Ezekiel prophesies the fall of Jerusalem, and the Lord speaks through him, saying that the priests of Israel have, in hiding their eyes from his Sabbaths, made no distinction between the holy, sacred, and the profane. Now this is something I can do something with. Mircea Eliade, the preeminent scholar of the history of religions, makes a clear delineation between the sacred and the profane in his book titled, you guessed it, The Sacred and the Profane.
He said it! He said it!
When it comes to defining what is sacred and what is profane, certain equivalencies are set up to show us, to give us an idea of the gestalt of these two profound ideas. Starting off simply, on page 10, he says that the first possible definition of the sacred is that it is the opposite of the profane, which tells us absolutely nothing. Lucky for us, 2 pages later, he builds off of that by providing this illustrative analogy. The polarity sacred-profane is often expressed as an opposition between real and unreal, or pseudo-real. So what is sacred is what is associated with what is real, and what is profane is what is unreal, or illusory, or Maya, if you're Buddhist. But these aren't just adjectives. These are modes of being, ways of existing, of being alive. They are polar opposite ways of experiencing the world and predetermining where your attention goes. The sacred mode of being is the religious, spiritual one, striving for connection with what is the most real, while the profane is the secular one, with priorities oriented by something other than what is the most real, if they're oriented at all. And that might be hard to conceptualize, and understandably so. So, Eliade illustrates these two modes of being by describing how each experiences space.
What a wonderful world.
Now, not outer space, but space in the sense of the space that we occupy, length, height, width, etc. I don't know what etc. would be. There's generally 3. The sacred mode of being experiences space as non-homogeneous, so it varies. It's hierarchical, based on the extent to which the sacred, or most real, manifests itself. For example, a cathedral is experienced as more real than, say, a supermarket. Walking into a cathedral inspires awe, wonder, and other peak emotions associated with an interface with ineffability, whereas the supermarket inspires you to wonder if they've restocked the edible cookie dough.
Me prefer the term cookie enthusiast. Yeah.
In the profane mode, on the other hand, space is experienced as homogeneous, non-varied, neutral, without the hierarchies associated with what is most real. It's unconcerned with what is the most real. A church is a fancy building with cool windows and maybe some interesting history. A home is the cozy place you watch Netflix. And the supermarket is the place you reluctantly venture out to buy your edible cookie dough to eat at home while you watch Netflix instead of going to be in a church. Sometimes I like doing that. I'm not a perfect man. Next, Eliade notes that if the world is to be lived in, actually, let's go back first. I want to highlight that the sacred and the profane are poles. No one is going to exist perfectly at one or the other. They're all going to exist somewhere on a line between the two. Cool. Next, Eliade notes that if the world is to be lived in, it must be founded. And no world can come to birth in the chaos of the homogeneity of profane space. Now, what that means is sacredness has to be established at a fixed point intentionally, in the midst of the profane, if it has any chance of manifesting later. What is involved is undertaking the creation of the world that he has chosen to inhabit. He then goes on to detail ways in which we can establish the sacred and allow for its emergence in the profane world. One key way that he mentions, most useful to us, is the symbolic installation of the axis mundi. The axis mundi, or world axis, is an ancient idea that there is a central axis that connects heaven and earth. It is the through line connecting the profane up to the sacred, and through the axis mundi, the sacred and the profane touch.
If you build it, he will come.
So, Sabbath tip number 2, symbolically utilize an axis mundi. This can be a crucifix, statue, painting, or other icon, not idol, icon, that is placed in a central place to help remember the divine reality. Remember is one of the central things of Sabbath. To help remember the divine reality and the purpose of the Sabbath. If you don't have one of those, you can use a piece of clothing. For example, pause. I have this beanie. It is my study beanie. And I like it because it's quirky and it says, "Don't look at me, I'm studying." When I was getting my master's, I would wear this beanie whenever I studied. And if I ever stopped studying, I had to take the beanie off. So after about a month or two, I had conditioned an association with this beanie and studying so that whenever I put it on, I was locked in to studying mode. Now you can use a hat, a shirt, or anything really, and to condition yourself to associate that piece of clothing with the awe, insight, and reverence associated with the constantly unfolding, dynamic, sacred, revelatory mode of being, and with Sabbath practices that we'll detail later. I've recently introduced wearing these breathing strips as my Sabbath routine, as my Sabbathy axis mundi. Next, man becomes aware of the sacred because it manifests itself, shows itself as something wholly different from the profane. This manifestation of the sacred, its breakthrough and recognition by a human mind, Eliade calls hierophany. In intentionally, symbolically establishing an axis mundi, we lay the groundwork for hierophany to occur. Once we've done that, there are a few ways we can optimize our mind and our surroundings for hierophany, for revelation, revealing of the sacred, which I'll tell you later in the video.
Why does everything have to be so complicated?
Hey. Guess what? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Says what made man Jesus in Mark 2:27. That's right, doing it perfectly is built into the whole thing. And if the nature of man is sinful, limited, and biologically governed, etc., as is the consensus of modern Christianity, then what is the Sabbath for, if it was specifically made for man? Now, top down, as the scripture says, it's a reminder of God setting us aside in sanctification. But bottom up, it's for us to remind ourselves of the same by setting ourselves aside and allowing ourselves the space to be sanctified. So, turns out, the Sabbath is about physical, mental, and spiritual self-care, ordered by the highest conceptualizable authority. What? That's crazy. I love it. So, what are the most useful, evidence-based things we can do to optimally take care of ourselves and make the most of our day of rest? One thing I'm going to do right now is drink a little water.
Now that's what I call high-quality H2O.
Some evidence-based things that we can do to optimally take care of ourselves and make the most of our day of rest. We know that regularly observing a Sabbath significantly improves mental health in the clergy, according to this study. And it helps prevent burnout, according to this dissertation. While taking time off for vacations may provide short relief from stress, in less than a week, those benefits are gone. However, religious ritual, consisting of actively establishing and engaging in the sacred mode of being, is significantly more effective at reducing anxiety than passively engaging in religious content. Now, what all this tells me is that we can structure our Sabbath around ritually reducing chronic stress and its associated factors, intentionally, both via and in service of the divine, serving both the top-down and bottom-up purposes of the Sabbath. Here's how.
Science time!
Enter the idea of allostatic load. Allostatic load is a fancy science word for how loaded up you are with chronic stress and the effects of that chronic stress. There are a few central biological markers of allostatic load. High resting state cortisol, which is a stress hormone you've probably heard of, a hypersensitized sympathetic nervous system, high resting heart rate, etc. But what you need to know is that having too much of an allostatic load is bad, very bad, and it can contribute to or cause a lot of diseases and crater your quality of life. Now, allostatic load is balanced out by something called homeostatic plasticity. Homeostatic plasticity is how your body naturally gets back to homeostasis, which is just the sciencey word for balance. On a cellular level, neurons utilize calcium signaling to adjust synaptic receptor density to renormalize firing rates. And on a systematic level, a vast number of function-specific mechanisms are used to balance where balance is necessary.
Who are you, who are so wise in the ways of science?
I know that didn't make sense to pretty much any of you, but Active Health Clinic has a great short video, way simpler than what I just said, explaining how these two things, allostatic load and homeostatic plasticity, how they interact. I'll link it in the description. Cool. Now, one important thing to note is that your balancing homeostatic plasticity mechanisms can be manipulated by your allostatic load or chronic stress. If your allostatic load is too high or overloaded, then the balance you get back to might not be your true unstressed baseline. Over time, without sufficient R&R, your baseline can get loaded up higher and higher with more and more stress. You don't want that. So, what are some activities we can do to decrease allostatic load, our chronic stress baseline, and allow homeostatic plasticity to do its own work to get us back down to our true baseline? Sabbath tip number 3, exercise judiciously.
Run for fun? What the hell kind of fun is that?
Exercise is good for you, to a point. Anyone who exercises regularly can tell you that rest and recovery is a central element of any exercise routine. Now, why is this? To be brief, exercise typically consists of stressing your body to trigger an adaptation. Weightlifters stress their muscles by lifting weights, causing micro tears in the muscles that then get repaired during rest and recovery, which leads to bigger and stronger muscles. Runners stress their cardiovascular system, challenging the limits of their heart and blood vessels' ability to deliver the oxygen necessary to continue in aerobic exercise, causing a cascade that enhances many markers of health: resting heart rate, VO2 max, stress sensitivity, and way more. We don't need to go into it. Now, the Sabbath, being a day of rest, shouldn't be a day of stressful induction of adaptation, that intense kind of exercise that we all love to do. Rather, it should be a day of recovery. Active recovery, if you like, but recovery. When we undergo exercise-induced stress, our sympathetic nervous system, the collection of amygdala, hypothalamus, adrenals, and more, is active, mimicking our evolutionary need to execute a fight or flight response. When we are in recovery, what is active is our parasympathetic nervous system, the collection of elements active during our periods of rest and digest. So your goal for the Sabbath, the day of rest, is to stay out of the stressful fight or flight zone and stay in the parasympathetic recovery zone. Now, what does this mean for exercise? Well, we already said active recovery. So if you do exercise, you shouldn't be tired when you're done. More specifically, this means if you go on a run, stay in zone 1. Don't let your heart rate exceed 60% of its maximum. You should be able to easily carry on a full conversation the whole time, and likely walking a decent amount of the time. And you should be nowhere near your first lactate threshold. Your lactate threshold, also known as your lactate inflection point, is the point at which your body is unable to keep up with your muscular production of lactate, which happens when you are using your muscles. This inability to clear away the lactate being produced by the muscles is what leads to what is commonly called lactic acid buildup, which just feels like getting physically tired. Your individual lactate threshold can vary based on your own level of fitness, but for our purposes, it's enough to know that if you feel yourself getting physically tired at all, you're not in recovery and you're working too hard. So, if you exercise, Keep it light.
I'm loose.
Okay, I just want you to be loose, okay?
I'm loose.
Oh, you guys are going to like this one. Okay. Sabbath tip number 4, catch up on sleep debt. You probably already know that the vast majority of our body's recovery happens during sleep. Being deprived of enough high-quality sleep often leads to hypertension, inflammation, increased and dysregulated cortisol, impaired memory formation, mood disorders like depression and anxiety, obesity, Alzheimer's, diabetes, a weakened immune system, and way more.
Okay, it's gonna be bad.
Getting quality sleep can significantly and noticeably alleviate symptoms of depression in as little as 24 to 48 hours, way faster than medication. Regular, quality sleep is also necessary to maintain your circadian rhythm, your body's 24-hour-ish biological cycle, the disruption of which dysregulates pretty much everything else, particularly the balance in activity between your sympathetic nervous system, remember the fight or flight, and your parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. There's a lot more biological evidence demonstrating the importance of sleep for regulation and recovery, not to mention the importance of dreams for emotional integration and much more. But for now, set your phone to do not disturb, turn off the alarm that's also probably on your phone. Come to think of it, put your phone in the other room. I don't, but you probably should. I should. Everyone should. Maybe. I don't know. Catch up on sleep. I should mention, oversleeping is also bad. So I'll leave that up to you to decide if that's a problem. But in any case, make sure your room is as dark as possible and ideally at a temperature around the 60s Fahrenheit. Sabbath tip number 5, spend time in nature. Experiencing nature, Eliade says, is one of the most fundamental and reliable ways to experience hierophany, or revealing of sacredness. Indeed, he says, the world is impregnated with sacredness. So mountains, valleys, rivers, forests, caves, glaciers, nature in its undisturbed glory can inspire awe and wonder akin to the encounters of the most real experienced in cathedrals and other traditionally sacred spaces. In The Sacred and the Profane, he specifically highlights the sky, mentioning many tribal and civilizational gods associated with the sky, as well as the majesty of celestial immensity and terror inspired by it and its storms.
Double rainbow all the way across the sky! Oh my god!
He highlights water and the creative, destructive, and transformative symbolic power it has in its role as fons et origio, spring and origin, the reservoir of all the possibilities of existence, preceding every form and supporting every creation, as well as the flood story of Noah and other cultures, and its ritual use of baptism via immersion. He also highlights terra, earth, dry land. He draws historical examples of our need for connection to and relation with the earth and ground, including the laying of newborn infants on the ground to be consecrated by Mother Earth, the act of burial, and the fertile fecundity associated with Earth and its vast phylogeny of inhabitants, plant, animal, and other. With all those millennia of collective symbolism and experience, this isn't really a hard sell. I mean, anyone who's walked in nature can attest to its benefits. Doctors in Japan prescribe nature bathing to soothe stressed out patients, and a variety of nature-assisted therapies are in development in the US. A great review by Shuda and colleagues summarizes and directs us to the findings of a few great studies that demonstrate nature's de-stressing power. One study found that a 30-minute walk in nature once a week could prevent up to 9% of cases of hypertension. Another found that walking to nature sounds. Another found that listening to nature sounds can speed up recovery from a stressful stimulus compared to non-natural noise. A third found that walking in green and blue environments, nature or nature with water, improved markers of stress like cortisol, heart rate variability, and mood. Although walking in urban environments did as well, probably just because walking is good for you. But Blue and green environments showed improvements in mental functioning over walking in urban environments. That lasted at least 30 minutes after those walkabouts. So, nice. And it's not just biological improvements either. Walking in nature also reliably reduces the amount of perceived stress an individual feels they are under. A neighborhood's rating in the Normalized Differentiation Vegetation Index, a measure of how nature-filled that neighborhood is, which is a measure, I guess. Cool one, I guess. I want to learn more about that. Averaged with the percentage tree canopy, which is how much tree cover there is, were associated with significantly lower self-described levels of depression, anxiety, and stress, regardless of how long the participants lived there. Not only that, a 25% increase in greenery around them showed even more improvements in stress levels. And nature doesn't only de-stress you, it protects you from future stress. Sudamak and colleagues demonstrated that a 1-hour walk in nature reduces stress reactivity in the amygdala, the primary brain area that senses and signals the presence of threats, in response to both fearful stimuli and social stress. This reduced reactivity is associated with reduced everyday mental strain and less of a chance of developing many different diseases. And finally, Eisen et al. Demonstrated that not only did biological markers of stress, inflammatory reactivity and glucocorticoid resistance to an endotoxin, improve significantly following exposure to a virtual nature environment compared to a virtual office environment, it did so regardless of socioeconomic and early life stress. This means that even a VR version of nature de-stresses you and makes you more resilient, regardless of your current financial situation or traumatic background. Now, it should be noted that the participants of this study were all males aged 18 to 30, primarily Hispanic/Latinx, and enrolled at UT El Paso. So the results need to be further explored and validated with a more diverse population. But that is a really cool finding. That's really interesting. Of course, that's not all. I can go into the recent research on the benefits of sunlight, grounding, and other outdoorsy stuff if you want. But for now, just go out, be in nature, hug a tree, kiss a rock. Don't kiss a rock. Don't kiss a rock. That's not medical advice. Don't do that. Hug a tree, though. That's good. Do that. It's good for you. Be in nature. Sabbath tip number 6, breathwork and or meditation. Breathing and the mental vitality it confers when practiced intentionally has had a central place in religious and spiritual practices for millennia. Be it ruach in Hebrew, chi in Chinese, prana in Hindu, or pneuma in Greek, breath is inextricably linked to spiritual life. And a myriad of techniques have been developed through the years to bring us in touch with our breath, our source of corporeal and spiritual life, and the most real. They also tend to be great for addressing problems of allostatic load. Who would have thought? Now, quick note, yoga does belong on this list, but there's so much nuance and variation to it that I'm just going to leave that to a future video. Feel free to practice it on your Sabbath. Just make sure to intentionally focus on your breathing while you do it. It's all about breathing and balance, regardless of the style. Cool. There may be exceptions. First, Wim Hof. One practice that has gotten very popular in the last few years is a reinvention of something called Tumo meditation, led by an entertaining Dutchman named Wim Hof, affectionately known as the Wim Hof Method. The basic Wim Hof Method breathing technique, when practiced regularly, is essentially training yourself to consciously control your stress responses by calming your hypersensitized central nervous system and then teaching you to consciously secrete epinephrine, adrenaline, and other neurotransmitters, endo-opioids, endocannabinoids, and anti-inflammatory cytokines in the presence of stressful stimuli, like exposure to cold, or in one study, endotoxins like E. coli. There are also a number of further positive effects that have been mentioned by Wim and long-term practitioners, but that evidence is still anecdotal and awaiting empirical validation, so I'm not going to comment on that.
Hey man! Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow, and let us go.
Now I want to be clear. Listen, come here. I am not a licensed teacher of the Wim Hof Method, though I would be willing to become one if they would waive the multi-$1,000 training fee. But I have completed both his fundamentals course and the Power of the Mind course, and I've been practicing it on and off for about 10 years. Now, I'll link to the Method's website below, as well as an instructional video. If you choose to try it, do not do it anywhere where a momentary loss of consciousness would be bad, like in water, while driving, or while standing. Even while standing. It's very powerful.
You're more powerful than you think.
It's really fun. It's really very powerful.
Way more powerful.
That being said, one round of the basic technique consists of 30 breaths in the style of controlled hyperventilation. That's 2, like that. Then resting with lungs empty, watching your bodily and mental sensations. And then when you've resisted the urge to breathe a couple times, take a full breath in and hold with full lungs for at least 10 to 15 seconds. Then you release. It puts you in a great mood and helps you build your capacity for self-oversight and metacognition, both of which are of central importance to your well-being. Again, if you want to try it, Wim's instructional video is linked in the description, and do not do it when you are not supposed to do it. It is very dangerous if done improperly. I think I've yelled enough to make my point. Cool. Double inhale or cyclic sighing. If you're less interested in becoming superhuman, as some of Wim's practitioners like to joke, and you just want to have some anxiety relief, you may want to try the breathing technique popularized by Stanford professor and podcast phenomenon Andrew Huberman, namely the double inhale. His lab, in collaboration with the lab of Dr. David Spiegel, put out a study in January of 2023 that demonstrated that this double inhale or cyclic sighing technique, practiced 5 minutes a day for 30 days, is effective at reducing both anxiety and negative mood. It is also more effective than mindful meditation at raising participants' frequency and intensity of positive mood. So they are more happy more of the time. That's pretty good, I think. Now, a full video analysis of this study is forthcoming. I've already written and filmed some of it, and I'm learning R, the programming language, so I can really dive into the data. But for now, the technique is very simple. Through your nose, inhale slowly. Once your lungs are expanded, inhale again to maximally fill your lungs. Then slowly and fully exhale, making sure that the exhale takes longer than the 2 inhales took in total. For example, easy. The study had people practice it an average of 5 minutes a day, but a lot of people missed. Most of the people missed a day or two. They still had significant results. I'll break it down later, but yeah, miss a day here or there, it's fine. 5 minutes a day is all you need. It's very effective. NSDR. Another meditative technique Huberman recommends is non-sleep deep rest, a term that he coined and then shortened to NSDR, which I thought was very thoughtful. It's also called Yoga Nidra, which translates to yoga sleep. Like the name sounds, it's like taking a nap without falling asleep. Huberman has said that he and Dr. Matthew Walker, who wrote Why We Sleep, great book, highly recommended, are working on an NSDR study, as there are none technically published thus far. Research on Yoga Nidra, the more spiritual precursor to NSDR, is still in its infancy as well. But the literature so far suggests that it has significant potential for stress relief, revitalization, and addressing mental health issues. Now, one interesting study demonstrated that an hour of Yoga Nidra practice raised the amount of dopamine release in an area of the brain called the ventral striatum. It increased that amount by 65%. Now, if you can't tell, do a little math for you. That's almost 2/3 an increase in dopamine, which is the neuromodulator responsible for go out and get it behaviors. That's astounding. That's insane. That's not cocaine level, but it's substantial. So, I mean, if you want to increase your ability to go out and get it, Yoga Nidra might be for you. Yoga Nidra, or NSDR, is essentially body observation and visualization exercise, where you lie down and pay attention to your bodily sensations, often in a structured way. You can do this by yourself or guided by a person or a recording. So, next time you want to take a nap, try NSDR or Yoga Nidra instead. Now, I'm really bad at taking naps. I cannot fall asleep in the middle of the day no matter how hard I try. So I have found NSDR very useful. And if you fall asleep, it's fine. You're catching up on sleep debt. Now, I like Ali Boothreed's guided videos, and Dr. Huberman recommends Kamini Desai and Kelly Boys on the Waking Up app, among others. I'll link these in the description if you want to try them.
Thank you for your interest in science.
Mindfulness. Mindfulness is meditation on hard mode. Not going to sugarcoat it for you. Originating in Buddhist philosophy and secularized by modern cognitive psychologists, the word mindfulness is derived from the Pali word sati, meaning remembering. It is the intentional practice of habituating yourself to spend more time in the present moment without judgment. Now, I'll do a more in-depth video at some point of the stages and effects of mindfulness meditation according to modern science. But very briefly, beginner meditators build their capacity for focused attention, then direct that newfound capacity for focused attention on their thoughts and sensations, while attempting to cultivate a distance from them. Eventually, in cultivating this distance, they become capable of open monitoring, which is non-elaboratively observing their thoughts and sensory perceptions in the present moment, intentionally and without judgment. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, are well-researched techniques in modern science. Mindfulness meditation is used in MBSR and MBCT to address problems associated with anxiety, depression, cancer, physical pain, substance abuse, psychosis. I actually did my master's on that. More about that in another video. That is really interesting. And even eating disorders. It's even been associated with improved immune function. Now, I had a therapist in college who told me that I needed to start meditating, and she was right, and I didn't. Oh well.
Great story. Compelling and rich.
The exact nature of what makes mindfulness meditation effective at helping with these problems is still debated. But my read of the evidence is that it is generally due to its role in practicing attentional control with minimal effort, as well as the accompanying increases in willpower and metacognitive function. So, if you want to increase your ability to control your attention, maybe away from your phone.
Self-awareness does not absolve anybody of anything. Am I balding? Hey, everybody.
And reduce your reactivity to your own, often negative thoughts. Mindfulness meditation may be for you. The most common instruction given to beginner meditators is to sit in a comfortable position and just focus all your attention on your breath. Start counting up, 1, 2, 3. And if you notice your attention has drifted to something other than your breath, treat your mind like a puppy that you're training and kindly and patiently just guide your attention back to your breath. And just do this for as long as you want. And when I was doing this regularly, I like to start a stopwatch and see how long I could go without looking at it. And somehow it was always 18 minutes. And I don't know what this says about the structure of the universe or the structure of me or anything, but it's weird, right? Right. Oh well. John Vervaeke, a professor of cognitive science and Buddhist philosophy at the University of Toronto, has a much more rigorous and likely more philosophically accurate explanation of how to start meditating. I'll link that below as well. Lectio Divina. Now, in Acts, Paul is described as often entering synagogues and having discussions and friendly debates from the scriptures on the Sabbath. Now, while this doesn't necessarily constitute an instruction in the way that we've previously discussed, it does highlight that engaging with sacred texts is a robust and very potent way to put the divine in its proper place as the north of our biopsychosocial compass.
Reading's stupid anyway.
Only people who can't read say things like that.
Now, a widely recognized form of intentionally engaging with sacred texts is Lectio Divina, a form of reading meditation. Similar to mindfulness meditation, in that it centers around being open to experience in the present, the practice of Lectio Divina essentially involves reading a sacred text and allowing the meaning that arises from it to penetrate and affect you. Now, according to the monastic Christian tradition, there are 4 levels to the long-term practice of Lectio Divina, starting with just understanding what the text is saying, then contextualizing it, then applying it to your life, and finally culminating in a fully numinous experience. There's not a lot of research on the biopsychosocial effects of Lectio Divina, but there is some. One doctoral thesis study demonstrated that practicing Lectio Divina allowed young women to better regulate their reactions to stress. The results of another small study suggest that practicing Lectio Divina significantly reduces PTSD symptoms and does so more than loving kindness meditation, which is a technique I'll talk about in a moment. Now, while the empirical evidence is kind of scant, many would argue that reading their Bible, Quran, Torah, Tao Te Ching, or Bhagavad Gita is and should be a central grounding element of any religious practice. Now, while Lectio Divina is technically a monastic Christian-derived practice, monastic means monk, so derived by Christian monks, and it was developed for use on holy scriptures, it can really be used with any text. Now, as you may have guessed, I'm primarily Christian, so I use my Bible. It's classic for a reason. But there are a number of lesser texts I found personally useful as well. C.S. Lewis's works, Joseph Campbell, Anthony de Mello's Awareness, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's books on flow, Carl Jung's work, Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. You can really use anything that strikes you as meaningful and worth contemplating, that inspires a sense of sacred connection to the divine.
Books!
I also want to briefly mention Akira the Dawn, a DJ who invented a genre of music called meaning wave. His albums, particularly the first Marcus Aurelius album, which I'll link below, have proven to be a profoundly useful resource for a novel form of music-based Lectio Divina. Now, if you want to be more intentional about reading scripture, Lectio Divina might be for you. I would recommend you read Michael Casey's Sacred Reading, The Ancient Art of Lectio Divina. It's super short. You'll finish it in like a week or less, and it'll give you a great background on it. It'll teach you historical background, it'll teach you how to do it, and it'll help you troubleshoot potential problems that you might run into.
Go away! Read some books!
Metta. Metta, or loving kindness meditation, is also derived from Buddhism and has been adopted by modern cognitive psychology, though it is less thoroughly and rigorously researched than mindfulness meditation. Its practice has shown effects of increased feelings of social connectedness, slowed biological aging, though that is disputed and still up to debate, enhancing positive emotions, reduced depressive symptoms, alleviating compassion fatigue, relieving anxiety, reduced blood pressure, and increased compassion and pro-social behavior, which is just a shorthand for behavior that benefits people other than yourself. It's easier to practice than mindfulness because instead of trying to not try to do the something which is nothing, loving kindness meditation centrally just consists of actively wishing the best for people. Specifically, if you want to try loving kindness meditation, the most common instruction given is, in a seated position, direct your attention to the warm, loving feelings you have for someone that you're close to. A spouse, friend, or family member. Then, step by step, expand these feelings to include yourself, your close-knit community, your extended community, humanity as a whole, and finally, the entire world and everything in it.
Many ways to say I love you.
All right, last big tip.
That still only counts as one.
Sabbath tip number 7, engaging with community. Now, just as practicing metta meditation is associated with increased feelings of social connectedness, engaging with sacredness is considered to be an experience of engaging with the inexhaustibleness of reality in a way that protects us from being overwhelmed by loneliness, homesickness, cultural shock, alienation, absurdity, and anxiety. It makes us feel content by making us feel like we're at home with ourselves and the world. This feeling of connectedness to the world is most easily found by connecting to other people, recognizing the parts of ourselves that we see in them, and then delighting in the parts that are novel. Loneliness is a pervasive problem in today's society, with a review of loneliness data spanning 106 countries confirming that a substantial proportion of people, up to nearly 25% in the case of older adults in Eastern European countries, feel that their desire for meaningful social relationships aren't being sufficiently met. And those data are from 2000 to 2019. That's right, a meta-analysis of 24 studies involving over 200,000 people reported that since the pandemic, loneliness has gotten even worse, which honestly is a surprise to no one. Loneliness is associated with depression, anxiety disorders, psychotic disorders, and self-harm, and is notably higher in neurodiverse communities like those with autism or ADHD. It is tied to increased inflammation and is both predictive of and predicted by perceived stress, meaning that there is a feedback loop whereby loneliness makes you stressed, and that stress can cause more loneliness, which causes more stress, etc., until you're stressed and sad and the most lonely person in the world. Oh, goodness.
I'm all alone.
Now, I've been lonely, and it does suck. But in nearly every case, it's not because no one is around.
I'm alone. No, you're not. I mean, what?
There are other people around. You just don't have meaningful relationships with them. Yet. Now, it's too complex to give a full instruction manual on how to make friends and find a community. Maybe I'll do that in another video, though honestly, I am still learning how to do it myself. But maybe we can focus on a couple central predictors of loneliness so that you can stop or even reverse the loneliness stress feedback loop. A meta-analysis of 95 studies isolated and arranged 11 elements into how strongly they predict loneliness. The 4 strongest associated elements were gender, boys were lonelier than girls, depression, self-esteem, and shyness. Those 4 had the biggest effect on whether a person considered themselves lonely or not. So, start off, focus on improving those 4 in your day-to-day life. Now, clearly, gender, depression, and self-esteem are better addressed by a therapist than a YouTube video. Point made. That being said, gender here is correlational and is mentioned in the study only in reference to prevalence in males versus females. Gender dysphoria is a valid and complex problem to have, as is the feeling that the people who subscribe to your gender, male or female, are not people you wish to emulate. There are good people out there if you search for them. Find them, imitate them. You may be a lot more comfortable with who you are.
Old woman! Man! Ma'am, sorry.
Now, depression is often symptomatic of a larger issue in someone's life, and a therapist will help you sort that out individually. Many of the practices mentioned previously in this video have been used to address the biological symptoms of depression. Now, as for self-esteem,
do you know, in 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important before.
realizing this is exactly what cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy are for. Now, as for shyness, a therapist could help, but you could also just practice extraversion. Not extroversion, where you get energy from being around other people, but extraversion, the big 5 personality trait associated with feeling positive emotion. So essentially, allow yourself to outwardly express positive emotions like joy and excitement. If doing it around other people is too much, just start doing it by yourself. When you're doing it by yourself, no one's going to look at you and be like, hey, what are you doing? That's so weird. Why are you laughing by yourself? That's so weird. They're not there. They won't know. It's fine. I do it all the time. It's not weird. It's great. Now, if you do it long enough, just practicing, being happy. I'm alone in this room right now. This is way too much energy for someone who's alone. But if you do it long enough, and then you'll accidentally do it when you're with other people. And then if they're not terrible people, they'll respond kindly and positively to your genuine expression of positivity. And then if they don't respond that way, find new people, because those people suck. Cool? Great. Awesome. I'm on your side.
And there was much rejoicing.
And if you're on the receiving end of someone else's positive emotions, you could try a little improvisation technique called yes and. Think of whatever someone said as an offer, accept the offer, and add something to it. So yes is the accept, and like this. Did you see that elephant in that tree? Yeah, I wonder how it got up there. I threw it. It's my sister's favorite stuffed animal. Why did you throw your sister's favorite stuffed animal in a tree? She kicked my dog. Now, the 4 elements that had medium, large, or medium effect sizes were social support, social anxiety, maternal expressiveness, and paternal expressiveness. Now, the parental expressiveness is likely there because this study was conducted on adolescents who spend a considerable amount of time with their parents. But if you're a parent, it's good to know that being emotionally and physically expressive in an appropriate way could give your children a greater sense of connection to you and to the world. And even if you're not a parent, by being expressive yourself, you could be giving those in your life a greater sense of connection to you and the world. Now, social anxiety is another very individualistic therapist one, but it will ultimately come down to exposure therapy, which is just forcing yourself to do something enough that it doesn't really affect you anymore. But a potential way to make it easier in the early stages is doing something that Tim Ferriss calls fear setting, where you intentionally and seriously consider what is the actual worst thing that could probably happen. And usually, it's not as bad as you think. So, and finally, social support. Not everyone is blessed with a solid social support structure, but they are out there to be found. Churches are great, tried and true places to find good people willing to see you through good times and bad. But if you like sports, if you like sports, join a local recreational sports team. It's just a Google away. If you like music, join a school band or go out to bars with live bands and get to know the people who go there regularly. If you're a nerd like me, go online and find programs or lectures about interesting topics and talk to the people that you meet there. If nothing else, you can volunteer at a soup kitchen or to plant trees. Volunteering self-selects for good pro-social people. People who are bad and don't like people don't volunteer. And the internet has been around for decades now, all based on connecting people to other people. There are apps that schedule you to have group dinners with strangers, rent a dungeon master for D&D, and way more niche hobby facilitation type things. Find something that you like that gives you a sense of meaning and follow it. Your people are waiting for you there. So all that to say, Loneliness, bad for you. But the inverse is also true. Social connections are good. Having a high level and frequency of social engagement is associated with significantly lower risk of developing dementia later in life. Better social relationships predict higher self-esteem, and vice versa. Worse social relationships, lower self-esteem. And less lonely people have lower levels of perceived stress and less reactivity to social stress, as measured by cortisol. Having enough high-quality relationships can even affect our sleep quality, which we already know is super important. Now, I mentioned volunteering a little bit ago. Now, that may be the best possible community-oriented thing that you can do. A review of the relationship between pro-social behavior and well-being from 2022 suggests that engaging in pro-social behavior, that is, doing things that benefit others, may reliably improve well-being, and that people with improved well-being tend to engage in more pro-social behavior. And this means that there is a positive feedback loop, conceptually obverse to the loneliness, stress, negative feedback loop, and that the more you take care of others, even at some cost to you, the more you're taking care of yourself.
Nice. Nice. Nice.
Now, I'm probably not the first person to tell you that having a social life is good for you, so I'll leave it there. Social connections help you self-regulate and bring your body back to a less stressed baseline. Once you have that community, spend time with them on your Sabbath, doing things that allow for hierophany, the breakthrough of the sacred. But again, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Jesus' main point was to prioritize the spirit of the law over the letter of the law. While there was no work, there was still plenty of time for doing good things with good people, eating good food, engaging with scripture, healing the sick, and rescuing lambs, oxen, and sons from wells. So, as long as nothing needs rescuing from a well, keep the Sabbath about the Sabbath, live it in the sacred mode of being, not the profane mode. Ground yourself with a symbolic axis mundi, go for a walk, not a run, and get enough sleep. Spend time in the great outdoors. Take a deep breath and learn to think better, or not at all. And finally, do it all with the people that you love. And you can mix and match these to your liking. What? Going to church intentionally could be both Lectio Divina and cultivating community. You can go on an easy hike with your community, being mindful of your breath while you do it. That's nature, light exercise, community, and meditation all at once. We're already experts. It's as easy as picking which elements delight you and doing them. Now, if you have any refinements or corrections to the things I've said in this video, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll try to respond to as many as I can, and I hope to learn from them. That being said, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.